every mother needs to understand, just because you have intrusive thoughts does not mean you're a terrible mother.
Welcome to Worthy Mother Podcast. I'm your host, Emily Hardy, a mom of two on a mission to help moms everywhere feel less alone. This is not a parenting podcast. Instead, it's a space for pushing back against societal expectations of perfection and embracing self-compassion in your motherhood journey. Let's get into it. Welcome to Worthy Mother Podcast. Today we are giving a topic of great interest to me, some space to breathe and to explore this topic on the podcast. We're going to be talking a lot about intrusive thoughts, OCD, some things that can really negatively impact the experience of mothers when we're not having these conversations, we're not dealing with it. And so I'm happy to shed some light on this. I, in my own postpartum experience, dealt with intrusive thoughts, and hearing that that was something that was fairly common for moms was huge in my own process of healing my anxiety, understanding that, okay, this is something I can deal with. This is something I can address without shame. And so, as always, we want to bring those conversations to the podcast and, just make these conversations a little less taboo so that we can release some of the shame you might feel if you do experience intrusive thoughts and things like that. So joining us for this conversation is somebody who is more than qualified to talk on this subject. So happy to have her here. We have Dr. Jenny Yip. She is a board-certified clinical psychologist, an author, and a speaker with over 2 decades of experience in treating severe OCD and anxiety disorders. And she is inspired by her own personal struggle with OCD in her work. She's dedicated her career to helping individuals and families overcome mental health challenges. And earlier this year, in August, she released a book called Hello Baby, Goodbye Intrusive Thoughts, Stop the Spiral of Anxiety and OCD to Reclaim Wellness on Your Motherhood Journey. So she is the absolute perfect guest to have for this conversation. I'm grateful you are here. Can you just go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the work that you do?
Emily, you've done such a great job introducing myself. I don't know that I have anything more to say. I have been working with this population, the anxiety OCD population, for over 2 decades, as you said, because I've had my own personal experience with OCD ever since the age of 4. And I've dedicated my life to this journey and this work because it is such a passion of mine, and because so many people go misdiagnosed or even undiagnosed and have to suffer for decades. The research is showing that it takes an average person 14 to 17 years to receive evidence-based treatment. So imagine going through that many years suffering and not getting the help that you need. I definitely am so glad you're doing this and we're having this conversation, because we can certainly raise more awareness for people that there is help.
Yeah, it's a topic that, talking about mental health is huge in general, just making it something that we're open to talking about and informing people. I feel like intrusive thoughts, the education on the front end of like what's actually happening is particularly massive when we're having these conversations. Just understanding that, again, this is something that can be addressed, and it's something that, like, if you're suffering in silence, you deserve the help and support to overcome what's going on. And so the fact that you've dedicated so much of your life and your work to helping people who are struggling in that way is so beautiful, so appreciated.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And, if we can have more people who are experiencing this and be able to feel like they can advocate for themselves and feel like they have agency to speak up without the negative stigma that surrounds mental health in general, but more specifically, intrusive thoughts, especially those forbidden intrusive thoughts, I think this conversation will be much more received and hopefully help a few people along the way.
I think it definitely will. I know that in your personal experience, you have dealt with OCD. Can you just share some of your experience, lay the groundwork there for us?
Absolutely. So I'm not shy about sharing my OCD experience. I remember when I was a kid at the age of 4, wondering what dying means and wondering what it felt like to die. So I remember asking my sister, what is it like to die? And her response was, well, you just stop breathing and your body just starts rotting. So she was painting all of this, like these gruesome images for me. And I tend to be a person where it can just run wild with various images. And I think a lot of people who have OCD also has that experience. So I just remember being 4, trying to not breathe, to see what it was like to die. And it was the worst experience that I could remember. And that was it. That was the thing that drove me to, well, I don't want to die. I can't die. And therefore, all of my initial intrusive thoughts had to do with harm OCD, whether it was preventing harm within myself or preventing harm for my loved ones. I would do whatever I could to make sure that death wasn't close by. So eventually it led to a lot of contamination fears because I learned that people die from illnesses. And one way to get an illness is to be contaminated with whatever viruses, bacteria. I mean, at the age of 5, I don't think I remember what I was specifically thinking. I do know that by the time I was 16, I was showering like 8 to 10 times a day. Each shower would have a specific routine of what had to happen first, second, third, fourth. And if I didn't follow that specific sequence, I would have to redo the shower. And I remember even at my like 16th birthday party, I was 3 hours late to my own 16th sweet 16 bash. And my parents would even joke about it today. They're like, oh, so you only took one shower today and that's okay? And I'm like, okay, this is a little ridiculous now. It's been so long since I've gotten past that. But yeah, it was really torturous. And unfortunately, I grew up in the 80s where there was no information about OCD back then. So nobody knew what to do with me.
Yeah, I've experienced anxiety in my life, and I'm wondering just when the conversation about OCD is going to catch up to where we are talking about some other types of mental health struggles that people deal with. I think probably it will. Like, there's a lot more conversation happening in recent years. But everything you're saying, I'm like, I can relate to pieces of that. I think my anxiety growing up came about in a similar way to that. And I have very little education and knowledge about OCD. And I think we kind of in our society brush OCD off as like this certain way that it is. There's a lot of like stereotypes. We throw the word around, things
Oh, yeah.
like that.
Yes, it's terrible actually, because I want to be able to explain what OCD actually is, maybe
Yeah.
to help the audience understand it's not just wanting your closet all organized and your books all lined up and everything clean and tidy. It is so much worse than that. And let me just say that a person who suffers from OCD is debilitated in some way. It interferes with their functioning, whether it's work or school or family or social. So if you just like your closet lined up and you don't get stuck over it, you can actually leave your house and keep going about your day. You don't have OCD. But let me explain what OCD actually is. So there are 2 parts to OCD. There are the obsessions and the compulsions, the O and the C. Obsessions are basically any sensation, images, thoughts that come into your mind that you do not want to have. And that's a key to understanding OCD. You do not want to have these thoughts. You find the thoughts grotesque, daunting, disgusting, shameful, embarrassing, and it produces a lot of anxiety. And of course, we live in a society where we have very little tolerance for discomfort. So therefore, the compulsions is what we do to get rid of this uncomfortable feeling. So compulsions are any type of behaviors, whether they're physical behaviors or even mental behaviors that we engage in to get rid of the uncomfortable feelings. So this can come across like checking things repeatedly and washing and seeking reassurance. And the internet is a perfect place for OCD because so many people would seek reassurance from the internet now, or you're seeking reassurance from family members or loved ones. However, even though that is like what OCD is, a lot of people still don't get how daunting it is. So let me paint it in a different picture. So let's say that you have a nightmare and you can't wake up from it, and you are stuck replaying that same nightmare over and over and over again like a broken record. And of course, a nightmare is going to create a lot of distress. So every night before you go back to sleep, you try to do whatever it is, some magical, superstitious, routine type of ritual to prevent nightmares from occurring. And every time you do it, you feel like, okay, maybe it'll work this time. So you engage in these like lengthy rituals to prevent the nightmare from occurring again the next night you sleep. Of course, it doesn't. So the nightmare keeps coming back. And every night you sleep, you're going through that nightmare to the point where even in your waking hour, you still have remnants of that residual effect. You know how it is when you have a nightmare and you wake up and you still feel it. And during the day, you get like intrusive memories of the nightmare. And then every night you're spending hours and hours. And how's that going to affect your sleep? You probably wouldn't get quality sleep. How will that affect your relationship? It probably will impact your relationship. Will you be able to get to work on time or get to school and function effectively? Probably not. And this is what it's like to have OCD. You are literally replaying that nightmare throughout your entire waking hours, and there's no stop to it because we all have intrusive thoughts. That's the thing.
So, with mothers in particular, I know that oftentimes mothers who experience intrusive thoughts, that may be the first time that they're experiencing intrusive thoughts to the degree where it's impacting their life. And understanding how common that can be, maybe not normal, but common,
Oh, yes.
it's like this is a giant issue when it's impacting us in a negative way. And I'm curious, what kind of brings that on in motherhood, and what kind of intrusive thoughts are moms having? I mean, I know I can think of a bunch that I've had and that I would get totally stuck on and were deeply, deeply impacting my way of existing, but love to hear from you.
Right. Yeah. So first, let me just be clear
Hmm.
that all have intrusive
Hmm.
thoughts. Whether you're a mom or a dad or you don't even have children, we all have intrusive thoughts. What makes my intrusive thoughts more daunting than your intrusive thoughts is that I care about my intrusive thoughts. So OCD tackles whatever it is that you care about. And during new parenthood, and let me also be clear that postpartum OCD doesn't just impact mothers, it also impacts fathers. This is how we know just because there's hormonal imbalances, it doesn't fully explain why postpartum OCD is so prevalent. So OCD tackles whatever it is that you care about. For new parenthood, what is it that you care about most during this period? The health and safety of your newborn. During the perinatal period or the prenatal period, what you care about most is the health and safety of your fetus and of yourself. Because even today, pregnancy and childbirth is a risk. Mothers still die today from childbirth. So a lot of mothers that I've worked with during the prenatal period, they're concerned mostly about the fetus they're carrying in their belly, as well as their own health and wellness. So some common obsessions that occur during this period has to do with preventing potential toxins, preventing potential contaminations. Okay, so fear of contamination, fear of harm, whether it's natural, intentional, or accidental. So natural harm could be miscarriage. Natural harm could be I die during labor. It could be my infant dies of SIDS for some random reason. So these are all natural harm thoughts that a mother or a father could have. Accidental could be I fell during pregnancy and therefore I miscarried. Accidental harm could also be I get into a car accident with my newborn in the car and my newborn dies. Accidental harm could also be, I was bathing my baby, I turned away for a quick second, my baby drowns in the tub. Okay, these are all real accidental harms that has occurred to so many mothers. How many times have we heard about babies or children drowning in the pool just because you turned for a brief second? And then, of course, there's the intentional harm. Intentional harm could be, well, what if I purposely dropped baby? What if I looked at baby's genitalia a little bit too long during diaper changes and I must be a pedophile? Intentional harm could be, what if I poked baby's soft spot in the scalp and caused brain damage? Right? So these are all intrusive harm OCD thoughts that a new mother can have. Some other types of common obsessions during this period have to do with decision making. So fear of making the wrong decision or making the imperfect decision. What if and this is very common during the prenatal period for a lot of mothers, what if I used a product that have toxic chemicals in it? And now I've just given my baby some sort of organ damage or brain damage. What if I'm in a space that has asbestos and now my baby has brain damage? What if I make the wrong decision between breastfeeding versus formula feeding? And for those mothers who aren't able to breastfeed, well, how many different formulas are there? What if I make the wrong decision? You know what I mean? This fear of making the wrong decision also surrounds like diapers. What kind of diapers? What kind of crib? What kind of car seat? What kind of strollers? I mean, it goes on and on and on because we have so many options today. The more options we have, the more choices and wrong choices we can make, right? So it has to do with making the wrong decisions. So those are some of the common intrusive obsessions that new parents can have. So of course, when the intrusive thoughts come into your mind, and remember, you don't want to have the intrusive thoughts. So when they come into your mind, obviously, imagining making the wrong decision, and whose fault would that be? My fault. Imagine baby dying, whether it's accidental, intentional, or natural, is going to trigger a lot of discomfort. So the compulsions that a lot of new parents get into has to do with checking baby for safety, whether you're checking the baby physically or you're mentally checking to go through your memory bank to make sure that you've done everything just right, or you can be checking the internet, or you can be checking with friends and family to seek reassurance that what you've done was correct, that you're not creating or causing any harm to baby. Some other compulsions, common compulsions, has to do with sanitizing baby bottles, sanitizing changing tables, any of the baby gadgets, washing your own hands to the point where they're dry, raw, and cracked. Some other type of compulsions has to do with avoidance. So avoiding baby altogether. I mean, I've worked with so many mothers who were afraid to be left alone with baby because what if I drop baby? What if I forget to feed baby? You know, there are all of the what if thoughts, you know, lead to your ruminations of more intrusive thoughts. So these are very common obsessions and compulsions that occur during new motherhood. And I, again, want to emphasize these are all things that occur that you do not want to engage with. But the thing about OCD is the more you don't want to think about something, or the more that you try to prevent a negative consequence from occurring, well, the more you're actually attuned to it. So a lot of people ask me, well, Dr. Yeb, why does this occur? And I want everyone right now to do this experiment with me. So Emily, I want you to not think of the yellow duck. Don't think of the yellow duck. Don't think of the yellow duck. Don't think of the yellow duck. And what you're smiling. Why are you smiling?
Because it's all I can think about.
all you can think about, right? And why does that occur? Well, when we're trying not to think of something, we're actually paying more attention and putting more energy into that thing that we're trying not to do. And therefore, you're actually putting more attention to it. So the way that I describe it, it's almost like your anxiety antenna is up. And what it's looking for are all of those potential threats that you're trying to avoid. So that's why you have the intrusive thoughts, because you purposely try not to think about it.
Yeah, there's so much in there. Every single one of those categories of intrusive thoughts, I can imagine having, like, I can think back and remember having, especially when my first son was born. And there's certain ones in there. And I think the ones of intentional harm can be particularly, I mean, scary is really the word, and shameful. And you can see how easily you get caught in, like, why am I having this thought and obsessing over it? And I mean, it just takes over. You can't stop thinking about it. And so then it feels like there's something wrong with me. Am I dangerous? And I know that I've had plenty of conversations with moms since going through my own experience postpartum, where it's like, okay, this happens. Like, this is something that we need to be talking about, because there is so much shame involved when you're having thoughts and can't stop thinking about things that are scary.
The thing about being a mother is that we put so much expectations on ourselves, and not only us, society puts so much expectations on mothers to be everything, to do everything, to be everywhere. And because of those expectations, whether implicit or actually, right in your face, we feel guilt all the time. The mom guilt is just nonstop. So if you have intrusive thoughts on top of the expectations that are already placed on mothers, then of course you're going to feel like, well, what kind of mom am I to have such terrible thoughts? And if you are impacted by the compulsions that disrupt rather than facilitate your bond with baby, then you're going to blame yourself even more. Why can't I attach to baby? Why can't I bond with baby? Well, if you're in avoidance mode to prevent the catastrophic harm from occurring, because you're trying not to think of the intrusive thoughts, then of course you're going to have a hard time bonding with baby. So you start to hear this like vicious loop that occurs. And then who do you blame? Well, we blame more of ourselves, because who else are we going to blame? I'm the one with the intrusive thoughts, right? So in my book, I am very clear, and I pound this message in my book repeatedly, because every mother needs to understand, just because you have intrusive thoughts does not mean you're a terrible mother. It only means that you care profoundly for your baby. And that is why you have the intrusive thoughts to begin with, simply because you care. Because if you didn't care about your baby, OCD wouldn't be tackling that type of intrusive thoughts.
It's like, okay, just breathe, release it. There's no shame,
Yes.
and there's the way forward. I had the opportunity to read through your book, and first of all, it is so well executed in terms of being so easily digestible and providing both the validation and the comfort of, like, this is okay. This is
Yeah.
okay that this is happening, but then also providing a lot of action and steps forward, which that's huge, right? Moms need these resources because this is something that is impacting so many moms, so many parents. And I just want to say, like, well done with that, because it really is a powerful resource for anybody who is going through any of this, or you need a gift for a friend who's having a baby or something. Definitely recommend checking out this book. I'm hopeful that you can share with us some of the maybe strategies for a mom who is dealing with intrusive thoughts, OCD, struggling to, like, bond with their baby or get through the day, whatever it is. What do we do? Because obviously, while we can say, okay, there's nothing wrong with you, that doesn't necessarily help moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have three main categories to be able to move forward away from the intrusive thoughts so that you can actually bond authentically with baby. And the first step is to lean in. So lean. And when I say lean in, is to lean into your experience, even though intrusive thoughts are so daunting and you're feeling terrible and you might feel shame and embarrassment and disgusted and anxious. If you avoid, we've already said, you're only reinforcing that whole vicious OCD cycle. So rather than avoiding, lean into the moment, lean into the experience, lean into baby, lean into whatever it is that you are afraid of. So some ways to lean in, and the evidence-based treatment for OCD and anxiety disorder is called exposure and response prevention therapy. Now, what does that mean? It means that you have to expose yourself, confront the triggers to your fears. Because when we confront our triggers, what we're actually doing is we're getting a corrective feedback that, number one, this fear actually might not be as daunting as what we anticipated. And number two, even if it is quite daunting, we have what it takes to tolerate it and to manage through it. And thereby, we're gaining confidence to continue to lean into our experiences, to face our daunting fears and worries. And exposures can occur through imaginal exposures, whether you're replaying the image in your mind. So rather than having the intrusive thoughts occur randomly, where you are experiencing it unexpectedly, you take control of it. You purposefully imagine the worst that might happen, whatever it is that you fear. Keep replaying that image in your mind repeatedly, again and again and again and again and again and again and again. And guess what will happen after a while? What do you think might happen, Emily?
I mean, it doesn't have power anymore.
Exactly. So same thing, like if I said like yellow duck, 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 yeah. Over time, it fades away. So the intrusive thoughts have power initially because we give it power. We give it power by avoiding it. Whatever we avoid will persist. Whatever we resist will persist. So by avoiding it, we're actually bestowing more power to the thoughts than what they deserve. So in order to remove the power from the thoughts and empower ourselves, we have to lean in. So that's the first step. Again, you can do it imaginally or you can do it like in person. So instead of avoiding baby, go to baby, right? Instead of sanitizing 5 hours a day, cut it down 2 hours, maybe 1 hour. Instead of checking on baby every 5 minutes, check on baby maybe once every 15 minutes, 30 minutes. And the more you practice this, you're gaining the skills to shift your perspective. So shifting your perspective is the second step. And what that means is shifting your perspective away from the rigid thoughts so that you can entertain other possibilities. By shifting away from the intrusive thoughts, you're also giving yourself opportunities for new perspective, for a new way of thinking. You're literally training your brain to shift gears. You know, it's like shifting gears in the car. Well, you're training your brain to do the same. You're shifting gears rather than being stuck in the rigid, intrusive thoughts of harm. You're shifting away from it. So by confronting your fears, by leaning in, you're allowing yourself to build confidence and tolerance to the discomfort, and you're training your brain to shift your attention away from the intrusive thoughts. And of course, by doing that, you're practicing and you're basically teaching your brain to flex your mental muscles. So this third step is flex. So flexing your mental muscles, flexing to build a more open mindset so that you are actually entertaining other possibilities. Because we get stuck in OCD thoughts when we get pulled in. So by pulling out, We are embracing other possibilities. We're getting that corrective feedback by building our flexible mindset. We're able to see the situation through a clearer lens. So lean, shift, flex. And there are other specific strategies to facilitate the lean, shift, and flex. So what I ask a lot of my mothers to do is to work on the 15-minute worry time. And I have that in my book. And the 15-minute worry time, what that is literally for 15 minutes, I want you to sit down, lean in, and with paper and pen or paper and pencil, not typing, because typing actually doesn't use a higher level of cognitive functioning compared to writing. So for 15 minutes, you're going to lean in and you're going to write about all of the worries that you have. You're going to write about, I'm worried about my baby. I'm worried that my baby will be harmed. I'm worried that if I turn away, my baby might have an accident. So each worry statement has a beginning and an end, right? It's very concise, it's very direct, it's very specific. And you're doing this for 15 minutes because by doing that, you're externalizing your thoughts. Because if you don't externalize your thoughts remain trapped in your brain. And then what ends up happening is, one negative thought always trigger another negative thought, always trigger another. And before you know it, it turns into a tornado. And I call this your ruminato. It's your ruminations spiraling out of control like a tornado. So to keep that from happening, you're going to take control of it. You're going to empower yourself by sitting down, leaning in, writing your thoughts. And after you're done writing your thoughts for 15 minutes, what ends up happening is you're able to shift your perspective. You're able to keep moving with your life. You're able to keep functioning because you're not stuck in ruminato. So you're shifting your perspective, and by shifting your perspective, you're also flexing your mental muscles to consider other possibilities. You're flexing your mental muscles and considering, oh, I might not be such a terrible mother. Oh, baby is probably more resilient than what I give them credit for. Mm-hmm. Oh, this formula is probably safe enough for a baby to drink. Right. So then you're flexing your mental muscles to be able to consider other possibilities, alternative interpretations through clear lens. So that's the 15-minute worry times. And you know what a lot of mothers tell me, Emily, is they don't have 15 minutes of worries to write down. So when that happens, what I say is, well, for 15 minutes, your pen or pencil cannot stop. So even if you run out of worries, you're just going to have to recycle old worries, because by doing that, you're giving yourself the mental space to lean in further so that you can continue to shift your perspective and build a flexible mindset.
I think what can be so powerful too, probably about using that full 15 minutes is you can realize, like, I can just make up whatever worry. Like if I have the 15 minutes and I need to keep writing, I can make up worries.
Oh, yes.
And understanding that that's where they come from, right? We might be exposed to things that are causing us to have those thoughts, but it's all made up. It's all thoughts.
Exactly. It is all thoughts that we conjure up. And of course, if we care about the thoughts, then we empower them. Mm-hmm. One thing that I ask mothers to do quite often, because you'd be surprised, by sitting down for 15 minutes, maybe twice a day, you're not getting that IV drip of intrusive thoughts, worries, ruminato throughout the day. Otherwise, it's out of control. And, the way that I describe it is you get that IV drip of ruminato throughout the entire day.
Yeah. And the stress from that, the anxiety, the constant anxiety of just having that constantly coming in. It's like, yeah, you can do the things to minimize that IV drip, the ripple effects of that then on how you're able to show up in life,
yes,
are massive.
Yes. And then one more strategy that I give a lot of mothers, and this really isn't much of a strategy, but more so of flexing your mental muscles, it's to think about ourselves and our needs as mothers differently. So I differentiate between self-care and self-maintenance. I think the word self-care has been thrown around way too much. And which mother is listening to self-care?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know of too many mothers who are saying, I need to schedule some self-care time now, because the idea of self-care sounds optional and it sounds like it's a privilege. And let me just clarify that a little bit, because the truth is, it's not optional. So I want you to think of it in terms of self-maintenance instead of self-care. What's the difference? When you are a car owner, do you have to take it in for maintenance? Like, you have to go get a field every week, every few months, you have to get the oil change. If something breaks down, you got to take it in for service. And then if you really want to be able to see clearly through the windows, you're going to need to wash your car maybe every week. So these are all maintenance that we have to take ownership of for our vehicles. How is our livelihood any different? And remember, if society has that expectation on mothers to be everything, be everywhere, do everything, we need a lot of fuel to do that. So how are you going to refuel your oxygen tank if you don't schedule self-maintenance time? And when I tell this to mothers, a lot of them think, oh, well, I don't have time to go to the spa every week. No, I mean, is going to the spa the only way to refuel? I mean, yes, it's nice, though. Even taking 5 minutes out for yourself, the first thing when you wake up in the morning or the last thing before you go to bed, just for yourself, you're refueling your oxygen tank. My family, my boys know that when I first get home, I mean, in the past, what has happened is, like, the first moment that I walk in the door, everyone is like just crowding me, mommy, 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 And it's like, Jesus, I haven't even stepped into the house yet, and I'm being bombarded by all of these requests and demands. So I have trained my family to just give me 5 minutes. And for those 5 minutes, I will take myself into my closet. I have a door tag on, like the ones that you have in the hotel, do not disturb door tag. So I have that hanging on my closet. And when that door tag is on, my family knows to not bother me, to let me be, because that is my time that I need to refuel before you're going to come bombard me with all of these demands and requests. So you have to find what is useful and healthy for you with your family. But it doesn't have to be a full-on spa day or even half a spa day. Even 5 minutes to sit down and sip your tea or coffee in the morning. How many mothers actually get that time? Not very many, right? So it's like, how can you create more of these smaller moments in your day-to-day life so that you're able to refuel? Because if your oxygen tank is in negative, just like a car, you're not going to run. So you have to prioritize self-maintenance if you want to be any good for your family.
I love that you brought that up. This is actually something that I like to talk to all guests about, is how we care for ourselves as mothers, because the conversation around what we call self-care is out there in so many ways. And I actually just did an episode about kind of the connotations of that and how important it is to be caring for ourselves and how that conversation gets confused. And so I love hearing other perspectives of like what it means. And I love that self-maintenance, understanding that like it's not some extra thing. It's like, no, you really need to be pouring into yourself, refueling, whatever, however you want to think about it. It's to be able to function in your life, and how well you're able to maintain yourself and your being and refuel is going to then directly correlate with how you're able to function in your life, right? Like, it's important to see that and to acknowledge that it's not just, if I get to it, I get to it. It's important. The stuff matters, especially for mothers.
Yes. I mean, when your fuel tank is going to the E, right? You don't say, oh, I'll just get to it when I get to it. No, because if you wait till the last minute, your car won't be running. You won't be going anywhere, right? Then it's a whole other mess because then you're going to need to get fuel, or maybe you're going to need to tow your car. And all that is like burnout for mothers, right? So if you are running on empty, just like cars, if you don't go get the oil changed when it needs to be changed, what happens? Your car is going to be damaged even further. We are no different. If I'm running on empty and I'm not refueling, I'm not giving myself the break and the maintenance that I need, then I'm going to burn out. And how many mothers have experienced mom rage? I mean, that's a common phenomenon now. Why is that happening? Well, because we're adding so much pressure on ourselves, not only us, society also adds so much pressure, more moms than dads. And when we're not able to fulfill everyone's demands, everyone's requests, then of course we're going to go into rage. So something has to be different. And another thing that I do mention in my book is setting healthy boundaries. Now, when I say healthy boundaries, a lot of mothers think just physical boundaries, and boundaries is so much more than just physical. In fact, some of the more important boundaries to set has to do with mental and emotional boundaries. And more importantly, not just boundaries with other people. We need to set healthy mental and emotional boundaries with ourselves. Because if we don't, then we are not setting up the expectations of what people, your family members, your loving children, can expect from you. Then we just give and give and give and give to the point where there's nothing left to give. And that is what leads to rage. When you have nothing left to give, you haven't taken the time to refuel, and then your demanding children, your loving, demanding children and partner are still coming after you for more when you don't have anything to give. So setting healthy boundaries, even within yourself, being clear, taking time to reflect on, not a daily basis, who has time for that, but taking time to reflect on who you are, what your values are, what's meaningful to you, what kind of family life you want to have with your children and with yourself. Reflecting on that on a monthly basis, even annual basis. I call it my annual review, where at the end of every year, that's what I do. I review how the year has been, what I would like to do more of, what almost killed me, what I don't want to do more of, and I make the adjustments. So by doing all of that, you're flexing your mental muscles to consider other possibilities, right? So we're back to that lean, shift, flex. You're flexing, you're flexing, you're flexing, because otherwise you're just stuck. And being stuck is when we feel that rage. And being stuck is how OCD digs its claws into you.
Yeah, it's all connected with the framework that you've laid out. It's like, yes, this is why this is all so important. It's important because we can't be our healthiest self, mentally healthy, if we're not ensuring that we're prioritizing these things. It's important to care for yourself in these ways and to set the boundaries and to make sure that you have this space to reflect and to understand like what you need, what you want. I think that there's a lot in there to take, and it's just so comprehensive and makes so much sense. So I love that. This has been just a very, very powerful, informative conversation that I think there's going to be a lot of listeners who can relate to pieces of this, and hopefully it provides some, again, validation and ways to move forward from whatever it is that you're dealing with in terms of mental health. Obviously, your book is out and listeners can find that. Is there any other ways to connect with you?
Yes, so you can always find me on my website, which is dryip.com. And in the coming months, I've created my Stressless Life podcast that I'll be resuming. it went on hiatus during the pandemic, and with twin boys being stuck at home, it was just not going to happen. So I am resuming my Stressless Life podcast and building the Stressless Mama community, where I will have master classes to go into these strategies on a much deeper level so that you can actually apply them in your day-to-day life.
That is amazing. I'm going to be keeping an eye out for that.
Thank you. And, I do want to also add that, a lot of mothers will say, well, how do I get more help? And if you are experiencing perinatal OCD or anxiety, the truth is not very many OBs or pediatricians are informed about it enough in order to direct you to the right place. So you can always go to the International OCD Foundation's website, which is iocdf.org, as well as the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, which is adaa.org. And there are therapist directories in both of these sites where you have to just interview local therapists that you find on the directory, and making sure that they have experience in treating at least OCD successfully, and they use exposure and response prevention therapy as the evidence-based treatment. Because so many people out there will say, oh yes, I treat OCD, except they don't use evidence-based care. And then what ends up happening is that you're in therapy for another decade trying to fix OCD, and it's not happening. So making sure that you find a reputable clinician who is skilled and has experience in treating OCD and anxiety.
I'm so happy you said that. I will make sure that all those links are in the show notes. So if anybody wants those resources, we'll have them there. But I think a really important piece of that is being able to advocate for yourself by just having the knowledge of what you can be looking for, what you can be expecting, what is going to qualify somebody to be part of your own care team. So I just super appreciate you saying that. I think that little nugget is, if nothing else, take that. That is so important to be able to advocate for yourself and know that just because somebody might be qualified on paper, it's still up to you to decide if they are somebody who is actually qualified to be a part of your team.
Absolutely. So yes, that's very important. And then if you're local in Los Angeles, I'm the executive director of the Renewed Freedom Center, and we provide treatment to children and adults with OCD and anxiety disorders as well.
Incredible, incredible work. Dr. Yip, thank you so much for being here and sharing all of this with us. I feel so grateful that you are on Worthy Mother podcast, and just really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Emily, for having this conversation with me. This is near and dear to my heart, and I'm so glad that your viewers will have a better understanding and that there's help for perinatal OCD and anxiety.
Absolutely. And thank you to those of you who are tuning into this episode. Catch you next week. You are worthy, Mama.